Hey guys, this is Tyler here, back with you once again, Maverick Capitalist here, and thank you firstly for all the new subscribers and for everyone who's been following my journey here. It's been quite an amazing ride that I've had the past couple of years in Florida, and that's going to take me into our topic today, which is why the dating scene is horrible here in Florida for men, and especially for younger guys. Dating, as all of us know, in most of America now, has gotten pretty trashy. It's just nothing like what it used to be. I know boomers like saying, oh, you gotta do this different and that, but as a whole it's pretty trashy. It's like 1% of the guys are getting 99% of the gals. That's just facts. That's what we have to deal with. But I think certain states also in the US are worse than other states. I believe that Florida is one of those states that absolutely sucks, which goes totally against the mainstream grain, and there's other YouTubers that likely would say the exact opposite of what I'm saying. But also note that most of those YouTubers are simply focused on cities like Miami. They're not looking at the whole state. Florida is much more than Miami. There's over 20 million people here. You have Orlando, Tampa, Miami, Pensacola, Tallahassee. These are all fairly large cities. And so you have to look at the whole pool together. Yes, you can isolate Miami, but Miami isn't the state of Florida. And furthermore, I think Miami is way overrated when it comes to dating and whatnot. That's just my opinion on this. But let's get back here to the state of Florida and why it sucks. The first major reason is the same situation as in many other states. It's a transient state, which means that a lot of people come here. They maybe live for a year, a few years, and then they leave. They go live elsewhere. They don't stay around in Florida. Also note that many of the folks who come here, they might come during college or maybe slightly older, and then they leave. Now the next thing here is that who does Florida attract? It tends to be an older demographic. So naturally, even if the gender ratio is more in favor of, or there were more women, the gender ratio or the age demographic of Florida is older. It's 40 plus. That's a lot of the newer people coming to Florida are 40 plus, which means that if you're a younger guy or younger gal, you're already a minority. And so if you're like a younger attractive gal here, you're a small minority of the bigger population. That's especially true when you go to these regional cities like here in Pensacola, or just say even Tallahassee. Tallahassee, of course, is a big college city, but what happens, a lot of those people leave Tallahassee once they finish college. So Florida does have younger population, but a lot of those younger people either don't stay here, and they're a small fraction of the state. The next problem here is that there's a really problematic simp mindset of a lot of these folks here. And the simp mindset, I think, actually stems from being in the deep south. I mean, even though Florida people sometimes say it isn't like the south, it kind of is the south. And I think it's combined with being on a coastal seaboard. Much of Florida is on the coast. When we look at a lot of the coastal states, they tend to be more liberal. So you have liberalness combined with that deep southern simpish kind of mindset that worked at one point in time many decades ago, but in the age that we live in now isn't necessary. That actually hurts a lot of decent guys. Their potential, not just with dating, but with finances, with getting a job, with advancing in their careers and their lives. It really hurts these like guys around them, because this is another big point people have to remember. Guys, they create a lot of the trends. They increase behaviors. They make stuff what it is in more cases than what women do. So the men create these situations. And so this simpish mindset causes there to be this like scarcity mindset with other guys, and also women as a whole reduce their respect for guys around them. Unless the guy's like loaded with money, they have a lot of status, or both, it just creates a loss of respect. The next problem with Florida is kind of tied to this. There's a scarcity mentality in the state because economically speaking, Florida as a state's not very well off. Unless you're in maybe the medical sector, you own your own business, say in construction or excavation or something, where you're building, there's not a lot of abundance of resources, especially for men. Just imagine that you already have this kind of simpish mindset working against you, this sense of scarcity among other guys, and then you have lack of resources. It's a terrible combination. People might be surprised here. A lot of women actually, like in this state I know, they prefer keeping a lot of these workplaces more female dominated. They don't like having a lot of guys brought in unless they're gay. The guys like just doing the work that the women can't do. Unless you're in niche areas, you're in sectors that women won't do. Most guys, of course, they fall into kind of this average economic bracket. And as we know, women generally want like the big ballers when it comes to like dating, relationships, etc. Now the next point here, probably controversial, but it's a liberal state. I don't believe that Florida is a conservative state at all. I think it's actually a very liberal state. Everyone knows here that liberal states, liberal women generally don't create an environment that's good for men. Even though we have what's identified as the most conservative governor in the US, or one of the most, I think Florida, the majority of the population are actually still liberal, and especially the women. All the guys could be as conservative as can be, but the women still vote. They still have 50% of the votes on paper. Their input also has a lot of impact on what goes on in the state. If it was all men voting, that would be a different situation, but a lot of women vote, and obviously they vote typically for liberal politicians. The next problem here is that, okay, I've mentioned this in other videos, Florida is a place that you bring stuff to. You bring your money, your woman or your man, you bring everything. And that's also the case, I think, in relationships. In my experience, I've worked in grocery stores here. Typically, the most attractive women that I encountered, 90% of the time, they were never from Florida. They were usually from the Midwest, maybe from the Northeast, sometimes from the West, but the vast majority of them tended to be from the Midwest, that were what I would deem as the most attractive women. Like, a lot of the homegrown Florida gals aren't actually that attractive, to be totally honest about it. So when you meet like couples or families here, been living here for 10 or so years, if the woman's quite attractive, or even if they've only been here for 2 years and she's in her 20s, typically she moved from a different state. And often it was with like a guy. It wasn't them just coming there here by themselves. Just know that if the woman did come by herself, she's probably not going to be on the dating market very long. She's going to have a lot of options. It's not going to be a very conducive environment. And that also brings up another point with dating. That's a problem, is environments where you can meet women. The environments that you can meet women are quite limited here. Contrary to what many guys probably think, oh, you're in a beach tropical place, but it's not actually very great in that sense. Okay, the next ideal, and I've kind of already mentioned this indirectly, women have a lot of options here. It's the same issue as in much of the US. There's so many desperate and thirsty guys that are seeking them out. There are so many MGTOW guys, or even guys that don't identify as MGTOW here in Florida. So many guys that I used to work with in like the grocery stores in their 20s, 90% of those guys did not even have a girlfriend. So they definitely didn't have a wife. It just illustrates how much abundance these women have. So many options. They can go on dating apps and probably have 100 matches. If they're pretty good looking, they're in their 20s. On the contrary, the women I met in their 20s here, 90% of them would have a boyfriend and sometimes even be married. So it kind of puts into perspective the whole dating, this situation, and something that I had mentioned before regarding the job market. When you go to provincial cities like Pensacola, for example, it's a big military base. It's a Navy town. So what does that mean? You're going to have a disproportionate number of younger guys that are very able. They have a lot of talent. They're going to be seeking out that small number of gals. It's going to create like just a lot of scarcity when it comes to dating. But that's the first part of this video here, and I look forward to everyone's feedback. And yes, don't come to Florida if you're trying to find your woman.